Hello. My name is Rowena Greer. And 10 minutes before I took the bench as a judge, my own sister choked me in front of the courthouse and called me a filthy animal. While our mother stood there and watched. I didn't scream. I didn't flinch. I walked inside. And then, I made them rise for me. I felt the morning heat rise from the pavement before I even reached the courthouse steps. The Texas sun had already begun to press down hard, wrapping itself around my neck like a warning. My heels clicked against the concrete, slow, deliberate, each step counted under my breath, like I used to do when I was a janitor here during law school. I felt the morning heat rise from the pavement before I even reached the courthouse steps. The Texas sun had already begun to press down hard, wrapping itself around my neck like a warning. My heels clicked against the concrete, slow, deliberate, each step counted under my breath, like I used to do when I was a janitor here during law school. The courthouse flag barely stirred, limp on its pole. I remember how I used to glance up at it during breaks, wondering if someday I'd have the kind of authority that made people stand when I entered a room. But this morning wasn't about power. This morning was about something far older, older than law, older than justice. It was about family. And the kind of pain that doesn't announce itself in bruises but in the way a name disappears from a mailbox. I was 3 steps from the door when I heard her voice. Well, look who finally decided to show up. Celine. Her heels struck the ground like they were rehearsed, perfectly timed, loud enough for the entire front plaza to hear. Behind her, my mother, Claudia, stood in a pale blazer too stiff for the heat. Her arms were crossed, but her eyes flicked nervously between us. I was hoping we could just walk in peacefully, I said, careful with my tone. Celine tilted her head and smirked. Peacefully? You showing up here is anything but peaceful. This is our space. You forfeited that when you left. My pulse quickened. I reached for the badge clipped inside my coat. Not to show it, just to feel the edges, to remind myself of where I stood now. Then she stepped forward. Too close. I smelled her perfume, expensive, sharp, like lilies that had been left too long in a closed room. You think this changes anything? She hissed. I didn't answer. And then her hands were on my neck. No warning. No hesitation. Her nails dug in, not deep enough to cut, but deep enough to frighten. You filthy animal, she whispered through gritted teeth. The world went muffled. I couldn't hear the footsteps around us, only the pressure of her grip, the panic clawing up my throat. I saw the sky blur behind her, the sharp blue smearing into white. My mother did nothing. She didn't gasp. Didn't shout. Didn't move. Just stood there. The way she always did. I heard someone shouting, then felt Celine's fingers being pulled off me. A courthouse officer stepped in, one hand on her shoulder, the other gently guiding her back. Another officer turned to me. His expression was professional, but I saw recognition flicker there. He knew me. Ma'am, he said. Would you like to press charges? I swallowed. My voice came out hoarse. No. Justice will handle it. My mother adjusted her scarf. The scarlet marks on my neck pulsed like a second heartbeat. They weren't from violence. They were reminders. That even after all this time, Celine still thought she could silence me. And my mother still believed silence was safer than truth. Inside the courthouse, the hallway lights buzzed faintly above me. I slipped into the women's restroom. Locked the stall. Faced the mirror. My collar was askew, lipstick smudged. A faint trace of blood at the corner of my lip. I dabbed it with a tissue. My hand trembled, just once, and then steadied. They tried to erase me again today. But they didn't know the ink had already dried. I pulled my blazer straight, fixed my collar. My reflection stared back with calm I didn't recognize, but welcomed quietly. From behind the door, I heard my clerk's knock. Your docket's ready, Judge Greer. I stepped out. Not as the woman they left behind. But as the woman they were about to face. Walking down the judge's hallway felt surreal. The light shifted, warm sunlight gave way to clinical overhead bulbs. The sound changed too. No chatter, no echoes of family bickering. Just footsteps, soft against marble. When I entered the courtroom, the gallery was already half full. I spotted them immediately. Celine. Claudia. They hadn't seen me yet. I stood behind the bench, adjusted the microphone. Please rise, the bailiff called out. The Honorable Judge Rowena Greer presiding. Celine's face went pale. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. My mother's purse slipped from her lap. I lifted the gavel. Steady now. No tremor. No hesitation. 10 minutes ago, she stole my breath. Now I decide how the room will breathe. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving behind the echo of chairs scraping marble and murmured gossip that clung to the air like humidity. When the last voice faded, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My hand still hovered above the gavel, suspended between triumph and tremor. I walked back to my chamber, the click of my heels swallowed by the carpeted hallway. The afternoon light pressed through frosted glass, thin and tired. I sat down and slipped my shoes off. My ankle throbbed where Celine's heel had grazed it earlier. The bruise would bloom purple by morning. I rubbed it gently, a quiet acknowledgement of everything I refused to say aloud. 10 minutes on that bench had felt heavier than 10 years in exile. On my desk sat an old folder of newspaper clippings I had promised myself I'd throw away. I opened it without thinking. There she was, Celine, at 16, radiant and smiling in a silver tiara after winning Youth Volunteer of the Year. Mother had written her a note that appeared under the article, so proud of our shining star. I scanned the photograph again. I had been standing beside her that day, holding the trophy she couldn't carry. But the picture was cropped clean at my shoulder. My presence erased with precision. I leaned back, pressing the clipping flat. The paper smelled faintly of dust and lemon cleaner, the same scent that used to cling to my hands after scrubbing kitchen floors. The longer I stared, the louder the memory became: summer, heat, and the first time I learned that silence could rewrite truth. The kitchen had smelled of dish soap and onion. I was 17, knees pressed against the linoleum, sorting mail on the counter. Beneath a pile of grocery flyers, I saw it, a heavy envelope, embossed with a university seal. Brown University admissions. My heart jumped. I'd stayed up nights writing that essay, the one about justice and belonging. The flap was already torn. Inside, the letter was unfolded, read, and folded again. Acceptance. Full scholarship. My eyes blurred halfway through. Mom, I called softly. It came. Claudia entered, holding a basket of laundry. What came? I held up the letter. Brown. They said yes. She set the basket down and wiped her hands on a dish towel. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. That place? It's too far. Too expensive. You'll get lost up there. It's covered, I said. Full scholarship. Her tone turned clipped, the way it did when she was done pretending. That doesn't include everything, Rowena. You think life's that simple? They only give scholarships to girls they expect to break. I won't let you run off to be some charity case. The words landed harder than I expected. It's not charity, I said, voice trembling. I earned this. She sighed, exasperated. You sound ungrateful. Your sister's applying to state college, why can't you just do that? It's practical. Realistic. Later that week, the letter vanished. When I asked about it, she claimed it never arrived. Years later, when I cleaned out her desk after Father's funeral, I found it tucked beneath old tax receipts, sealed again with tape. She had kept it, not as proof of pride, but as evidence of control. The memory slid into another, sharper one, the red envelope. It was Lunar New Year, and the house was full of laughter and the smell of soy sauce and fried dough. My uncle passed out envelopes to all the cousins. Mine was thinner, but I smiled anyway. Half an hour later, voices rose near the hallway. It's gone, someone shouted. My mother's footsteps found me. Rowena, come here a moment. I followed her to the guest room. Celine was already there, arms crossed, face serene. A $200 envelope disappeared, my mother said. You were the last one near the table. I didn't touch it, I said quickly. Claudia exchanged a look with Celine. Don't make this worse, honey. Just give it back quietly. We'll forget it ever happened. There's nothing to give back. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Her voice sharpened. Do I need to search you? Tears burned my eyes. Go ahead. She did. Found a folded 20 in my pocket, the emergency cash Father had given me for books. Her jaw tightened. We'll talk about stealing later. For now, apologize. The words stuck in my throat. Everyone was watching from the hallway. My uncle, my aunt, cousins whispering. I didn't take it, I whispered. Apologize, she repeated, louder. So I did. To the room. To the silence. To the version of me they preferred, small, guilty, invisible. That night, I lay awake listening to the clatter of dishes downstairs. I imagined Father's quiet voice if he had been there. He would have said, "Truth doesn't disappear, Ro. It just waits." He never said that, of course. I made it up to survive the quiet. Back in the present, the memory loosened its grip slowly. I closed the folder. The office was dim now, the blinds drawn low. The courthouse cleaning staff moved faintly down the corridor, vacuums humming like distant bees. My phone buzzed on the desk. A message preview from Celine, family dinner this Sunday. Big announcement. I stared at the screen. Big announcement, meaning photo ops, speeches, the kind of gathering where forgiveness was a performance. The invitations weren't olive branches. They were stage cues. I deleted it. My thumb hesitated only a second before pressing confirm. The room fell quiet again. I walked to the bookshelf, fingers tracing the spines until they found a leather-bound folder, my old resume, edges frayed, ink faded. GPA 3.97, law review editor, multiple scholarships that no one ever acknowledged. I placed it beside the file of current evidence, property transfers, financial records, affidavits waiting to be signed. The contrast between the two felt like a conversation between who I was and who I refused to be again. For years, they wrote the family story as if I'd never existed. My mother the saint, Celine the prodigy. And me, the footnote best forgotten. But this time, I had my own pen. I slid the resume into the file and whispered, softly but with weight, "If they wrote me out of the story, I'll write a version they can't delete." Outside, thunder rolled distantly across the Austin skyline. The sound was low and steady, like a heartbeat that refused to fade. I turned off the lamp, the room bathed in amber from the streetlights below. My reflection hovered in the glass, a woman older, steadier, but still haunted by the outline of the girl cropped out of every photograph. Healing didn't arrive suddenly. It happened softly, step by step. And tonight, the first step was remembering. The file settled into my briefcase with a soft thud, almost tender, almost kind. My fingers lingered on the leather flap for a moment before fastening the latch. That briefcase had been mocked more times than I could count. "You always look like you're headed to a funeral," Celine used to laugh, tossing her glossy hair, perfectly lit by whatever Instagram filter she lived inside. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was burying something, myself, most likely. I slid the bag beneath my chair and leaned back. The office felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that creeps into your chest and starts whispering things you spent years silencing. Outside, dusk settled in behind the blinds, casting lines across the carpet like a cage I'd willingly stepped into. My laptop blinked awake, the blue glow harsh against the darkened room. I pulled up the folder I had titled only with a date, October 3rd, inside it, PDFs, scanned receipts, letters from banks that never should have had my name on them. But I didn't click on any of those. Not yet. Instead, I opened my old university email archive. I hadn't looked at it in years. Most of it was junk, reminders about course deadlines, club invitations I never attended. And then, buried somewhere between a syllabus and a campus safety alert, I found it, the last email I had sent from that address. Subject, room situation, urgent. The body was just 3 lines. My keycard isn't working. I think the rent didn't go through. I'm parked near the student center tonight, just in case. It was dated November 8, 2007. I remembered the night exactly. It was cold enough that my breath had fogged the windshield. I curled up in the back seat, knees pulled to my chest, a fleece jacket failing to do what a blanket would have. I had $20 left, enough for gas and maybe crackers. My textbook sat on the passenger seat, still open to case law I couldn't bring myself to memorize anymore. I stared at the ceiling of the car and whispered a name I hadn't said aloud in days. Mom. But no one came. Back then, I had still believed that someone might. That next morning, I showered in the campus gym, dried my hair under the hand dryer, and walked to class like nothing had shifted. I laughed when people said they were so stressed about finals, nodded along when someone suggested we hit up IHOP after study group. Home wasn't 4 walls. It was any place where no one asked why you looked tired. Months later, I was riding my bike home from the law library when a car door swung open into the lane. I swerved, fell, and landed hard. My shoulder cracked as the pavement rushed up to meet me. The hospital was cold. Not because of the temperature, but because of the silence. The nurse asked me for an emergency contact. I gave her my mother's name and number. She wrote it down. I waited. No one came. The nurse brought me apple juice, thinking I might be in shock. She asked again, gently, if there was someone else she could call. I told her no. Some absences are louder than screams. Lying there, for in my arm, I started counting ceiling tiles just to keep myself from unraveling. I memorized the pattern, the one flickering panel, the vent that hissed louder than the others. If I could find order in the ceiling, maybe I could believe in it elsewhere. But the room stayed empty. My discharge papers were handed to me with a plastic bag containing my torn jeans and blood-stained shirt. I took the bus back to campus, leaning my good shoulder against the window, pretending I didn't see my reflection staring back at me, asking why. I didn't cry. Not once. Tears would have meant I believed someone was supposed to come. A year before that, I'd met Evan. Kind eyes, a nervous laugh. He studied architecture and always smelled like sawdust and iced coffee. I liked that he didn't talk much at first, just listened. He said I had a quiet gravity. We were together 6 months before I brought him home. Celine met us at the door. You didn't tell me he was cute, she said, eyes scanning him like a listing price. He blushed. I burned. Claudia pulled me aside later that night, her tone low and warning. Men like him get spooked easy. Don't come on too strong. You've always been intense. I smiled tightly, tried to laugh it off. But Evan left the next morning and never called. When I finally messaged him, I got one line back, your family says you're a lot. I didn't realize that meant broken. She didn't need to hit me to break me. Just whisper. Back in the present, I closed the email tab. My resume sat in the printer tray, crisp and old all at once. In the header, Public Defense Intern, 2011. I traced the line with my thumb. They thought I wouldn't survive the freeze-out. But I had. Quietly, slowly, gently. I opened the bottom drawer of my closet and pulled out a flat box. Inside, a sealed envelope labeled in my handwriting, in case they ever come for me again. It had started as a journal. Then it became a record. Printouts, screenshots, timestamps. Dates when Celine used my name. Times Claudia signed documents on my behalf. Quiet thefts, one after another. I laid it out on the bed, spread like pieces of a quilt stitched from betrayal. I used to beg to be seen. Now, I'll make it impossible for them to look away. I slipped the envelope of evidence back into my briefcase, pressing the latch until it clicked. The sound was small but final. I had proof now, every theft neatly catalogued, every signature that wasn't mine. Still, I knew paper alone couldn't quiet the ghosts that carried my name. 2 nights later, an invitation arrived in my inbox. Empower Women, Empower Change Annual Gala. The banner shimmered gold on white. I didn't plan to attend until I saw the featured speaker listed in bold letters, Celine Vaughn, Communications Director, Vaughn Foundation. My stomach tightened. The hotel ballroom glowed under strands of soft lights. White tablecloths, polished silver, laughter that sounded rehearsed. I took a seat near the back, surrounded by strangers in jewel tones and pearls. The air smelled faintly of perfume and money. When Celine took the stage, applause rippled like a wave. She looked radiant, all charm and precision. Tonight, she began, I want to talk about the power of women lifting each other up. My fingers stiffened around the napkin in my lap. Her next sentence hit with quiet cruelty. Word for word, she was reading the speech I had written 2 years ago for a legal aid fundraiser. Even the pause before the second paragraph, my pause, she kept it. They didn't just steal my voice, I thought. They rehearsed it until they believed it was theirs. Claudia sat in the front row, smiling with pride, hand pressed to her chest like a mother seeing her legacy unfold. She looked up at the stage as if Celine were the only daughter she ever had. I stayed until the applause ended. When Celine spotted me from across the room, her smile faltered. Only for a moment. Then she raised her glass. I didn't return the gesture. The next morning, I stood inside the county clerk's office, fluorescent lights humming above, the smell of toner and stale coffee hanging in the air. I requested the property file for my father's land. The clerk disappeared into the back and returned with a stack of documents bound with a rubber band. The signature on the transfer papers was mine, at least, it was supposed to be. The date read a week before my father died. But he'd been in a coma that entire month. The witness line bore Claudia's signature, her cursive looping proudly, as if she wanted the world to know she'd been there. My pulse slowed. My knuckles pressed white against the counter. The ink seemed to shimmer under the light, mocking me with every careful stroke. I took photos, page after page, hand steady though my chest felt like it was caving in. The clerk looked at me curiously but said nothing. I thanked her quietly, gently, then walked out into the sunlight, blinking against the sudden brightness. That afternoon, Claudia invited me for coffee. "It's been too long," she said over the phone, her voice honeyed. "Imogen's been asking about you." I went. Her house hadn't changed, still spotless, every pillow aligned like soldiers on parade. Imogen sat at the table with colored pencils spread out before her. "Aunt Rowena," she said brightly, waving. "Look, I'm making a family tree." She held up the drawing. There was Grandma Claudia, Mommy Celine, Grandpa Frank, and a little cat in the corner. I searched the page. My name wasn't there. "Where am I, sweetheart?" I asked softly. Imogen smiled. "Mom said you're kind of like the helper. Like a church lady who helps people when they're sad." My throat tightened. "Oh. That's nice." I forced a smile, nodding gently, quietly, as if my heart hadn't just cracked. Claudia walked in then, carrying a tray of lemon bars. She looked at the picture and said, "Children absorb what's around them. Maybe if you visited more often, she'd know your family." It was spoken lightly, but the words landed heavy. I said nothing, my palms flat against the table. Underneath, my fingernails pressed half-moons into my skin. Imogen skipped away, humming. Claudia cut herself a slice of lemon bar and sat down across from me. "You should come to more of Celine's events," she said. "It means a lot to her when the family supports her." I met her gaze. "I did. Last night." Claudia smiled faintly, missing the meaning. "Wasn't she wonderful?" "She was convincing," I said. Her fork paused midair. For the briefest moment, her eyes flickered, like a candle threatened by a breeze. Then she set the utensil down neatly. "You always find fault, Rowena. It's exhausting." I rose from the table, my voice steady. "You raised me to believe silence was polite. It's not. It's participation." She blinked, caught off guard. "I don't like your tone. I don't like your lies." The room fell silent. The only sound was the clock ticking on the wall, marking time that belonged to no one anymore. I left before she could respond. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the box of documents spread before me again. The evidence felt heavier than the air itself. Among the files was a thin notebook, my father's journal. The pages smelled faintly of cedar. Near the back, one sheet had been torn out, jagged at the edge. I knew what had been there, his list of final wishes. I turned to the next blank page and uncapped my pen. My handwriting came slower than I expected, but sure. Just because they speak louder doesn't mean they're right. The ink bled a little, softening at the edges. I watched it dry. For years, they had told my story for me. Polished it, rewrote it, performed it. Somewhere along the way, I had almost believed them. But not anymore. They told my story for so long, I almost believed it wasn't mine to take back. I closed the journal, the leather cool beneath my palm, and whispered softly, gently, "It's mine now." The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the kitchen clock. I had left the journal on the table, its leather cover still warm from my hand. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, heavy and patient. Somewhere beyond the glass, the city moved on, cars, lights, laughter, but inside, it felt like the world had narrowed to the sound of my breathing. When I walked into my office the next evening, a white envelope waited on my desk. No return address. No name on the front. Just a faint coffee stain in one corner. The letterhead inside bore the seal of the Judicial Appointment Committee. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. To Judge Rowena Greer, it began. An anonymous complaint has been submitted concerning inappropriate conduct during your legal internship. I read it twice, each word slower than the last. The accusation was absurd, yet familiar in tone, softly cruel, designed not to destroy but to stain. Attached was a scanned copy of the letter itself. The handwriting was neat, elegant, the loops of the R's curving the same way I'd seen countless times before. I dug through the drawer beside me, finding an old birthday card. "Love, Mom," it read, in that same looping script, the tail of the Y curling like a snake. I laid the 2 pages side by side. There was no doubt. The hand was the same. Celine wouldn't go this far. Would she? I stared at the letters until they blurred. I could almost hear my mother's voice in the lines. It's for your own good, Rowena. You've lost perspective. You need to be humbled. She'd said that once when I was 15, after she found my essay about injustice folded inside a notebook. The clock on the wall hit midnight. The only light came from the desk lamp, pale and unkind. The next morning, I brought the letter to Maris. Her office smelled faintly of paper and peppermint tea. She read it once, set it down, and leaned back. You knew this would come, she said quietly. I didn't know it would be her, I replied. Maris's brow lifted. You always knew it would be them. The words stung because they were true. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside her window, downtown traffic pulsed like a heartbeat. Maris finally said, You'll need to answer this formally, but we both know it's a setup. She wants you off balance before the hearing. I nodded. The anger didn't flare. It settled low, steady, like a pilot light. Later that night, I sat at my dining table with the envelope still in front of me. I opened the old watch my father had left me, heavy brass, scuffed at the edges. I'd worn it for years before tucking it away. The back popped open with a faint click. Tucked inside, between the gears, was something I'd never noticed before, a small USB drive wrapped in tissue. My pulse slowed as I slipped it into the laptop. One file appeared, for Rowena.mp3. When I pressed play, his voice filled the room, raspy, halting, but steady. Rowena gets the house. She gets the land. No one else. I've seen what they've done to her. You protect what's yours, my girl. Promise me. The recording ended with a faint cough and silence. I sat there for a long time, unable to move. My father's voice had always been quiet in life, but here, even in death, it was firm. My chest tightened, my throat refused to open. Tears didn't fall. Instead, my lungs simply refused to exhale. He had known. He had seen everything I had tried to hide. When I finally stood, the world felt clearer. Not lighter, just defined. The truth had always been there, I had simply been too tired to look. The next morning, I met Maris again. She listened to the recording twice, nodding slowly. This changes everything, she said. We'll file a motion to contest the property transfer. Guardianship over Imogen, too, if Celine's negligence can be proved. Are you ready for that? I'm not sure ready matters, I said. It's necessary. Together we gathered evidence. Bank statements, notarized copies, years of correspondence. I went through old flash drives, found emails from my mother forwarding my achievements to Celine's address with subject lines like "Look what we can use for PR." Every file was another piece of me they had taken. While Maris drafted the motions, I printed out transcripts of my father's recording. The printer's hum filled the silence, rhythmic, grounding. For years I'd thought silence meant safety. But silence was where they grew bolder. That evening, my phone buzzed across the counter. A message from Claudia. Let's not do this. You're better than revenge. I stared at it for a long moment, thumbs hovering over the screen. I typed, deleted, typed again. This isn't revenge. It's correction. I didn't send it. Instead, I opened the folder marked evidence and moved the recording inside. The progress bar filled slowly, softly, like a breath drawn in. Before closing the laptop, I whispered into the dark, You taught me how to lie by example. Now you'll learn what the truth sounds like under oath. The night outside was still. I walked to the window, watching the faint reflection of myself against the glass, steady, unsmiling, no longer waiting to be rescued. Somewhere behind the reflection hung a photo of Celine at a fundraiser, the one where she wore my old blazer, sleeves rolled up, pretending confidence she didn't earn. I took the frame down and turned it face down on the table. Quietly, slowly, gently, I exhaled. For the first time, the silence felt like mine. The photo frame still lay face down on the table when the phone rang. My mother's voice came through the receiver smooth as glass, each syllable practiced. I found something of yours in the attic, she said. Old school papers, maybe. You might want to come by before I toss them. I almost said no. But curiosity, habit, really, pulled me back to that house. The drive felt longer than I remembered, the road lined with bare trees bending inward like spectators. When I parked, the porch light was already on, golden and false, like every welcome I'd ever been given there. Claudia opened the door with a smile too wide. You look tired, she said, ushering me inside. The living room smelled of lemon polish and smoke. The fireplace crackled, burning more than logs. Tea? I'll pass. I climbed the attic stairs, each creak loud enough to make the house seem alive. The air grew dusty, filled with the scent of old paper and mothballs. I searched the shelves, but the box that once held my yearbooks and photos was gone. Downstairs, she was arranging china cups as if preparing for a guest who mattered. The box, I said. Where is it? Oh, she answered lightly, not looking up. I burned those years ago. You were never sentimental. The words landed with precision, each one a match. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. You burned them? Don't look at me like that, she said, stirring sugar into her tea. Things get cluttered. Sometimes it's best to start over. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. The fire popped in the hearth, the sound of something small being destroyed. They hadn't just erased me. They had set the evidence on fire. I left without saying goodbye. Later that afternoon, back at my house, an official envelope waited in the mail. Internal Revenue Service. I tore it open, the paper stiff, cold. They were requesting documentation for unpaid back taxes from a business I'd never heard of. According to the form, I owned a company registered under my name, an LLC with a downtown address. My old college rental. I logged onto the public database, heart thudding. There it was, Greer Solutions LLC. Filed 3 years ago. Digital signature, Celine Vaughn. They never stopped using me. They just got better at hiding it. I sat at my desk, rereading the notice until the letters blurred. The betrayal wasn't new, it just evolved. It wore better clothes, learned legal language. The next evening, I attended a networking dinner for women in law. I needed the distraction. The banquet hall buzzed with laughter, glasses clinking. A woman from the district attorney's office stopped me near the buffet. Your speech last week was incredible, she said. Everyone was talking about it. My speech? She pulled up her phone, scrolling. At the fundraiser. You spoke about resilience. It was so moving. The video filled the screen, Celine, standing beneath the same chandelier I'd written about in my essay 2 years ago. She was reading my words again. Word for word. We rebuild not because we're unbroken, but because we choose not to stay shattered. My throat closed. My name was tagged in the caption, Celine Vaughn, Visionary Advocate. I handed the phone back, smiled tightly. She's very persuasive. The woman beamed. You two must be so proud of each other. I walked outside into the cold air. The street lamps hummed. My breath came short and shallow. My voice, every word I'd ever written, had been taken, worn like a costume. And the audience applauded, none the wiser. When I reached Maris's office the next morning, she was already pouring coffee. I handed her the IRS notice and the screenshot of the video. She skimmed both, jaw tightening. Are you filing criminal charges? She asked. I looked out the window, watching a bus pull away, exhaust clouding the air. I'm done surviving them. We spent hours drafting documents. My signature appeared again and again, this time real, deliberate. Affidavit for property fraud. Identity theft. Perjury. I signed them all. Each stroke of the pen felt less like anger and more like release. It's not revenge, I said quietly, watching the ink dry. It's acknowledgement. Maris nodded. That's what justice is supposed to be. When she left for court, I stayed behind, reading through every page until my eyes blurred. There was grief there, of course there was, but beneath it, something steadier. Control. That night, I sat on the couch, laptop open, the glow cutting through the dark. My phone buzzed beside me. A new post from Celine's account. A photo of her hugging Claudia in front of the fireplace. Family is everything. Especially when one forgets that. My pulse slowed, the way it does before a storm. I didn't comment. Didn't call. Didn't scream. I deleted the app. Closed the laptop. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sharp, clean, like a blade freshly honed. They wanted silence, I whispered to the room. I'll give them a courtroom. I folded the signed affidavit, placed it inside an envelope labeled filed. My handwriting was calm, precise. The next story they'd tell would begin with a docket number. The gallery smelled of wine and oil paint, a sweet tension that made my throat tighten slowly. I moved through the crowd like a shadow with credentials, Maris at my side, her presence steady and practical. We came for conversation and restraint, for the brief refuge of art and polite smiles between legal meetings. My eyes found Dorian across the room before his voice found mine. He was laughing softly at something Celine said. He looked like a man surprised by warmth where he expected coolness. His smile landed on Celine with an ease that used to be mine. Maris's fingers closed lightly around my wrist, a small reminder that I was not alone in the room. I breathed in, slowly, quietly, feeling the old hollow where trust had been carefully carved away. Soothing line, I learned slowly, gently, how to sit with the ache without letting it define me. Soft landing close, for a moment I watched them, collecting detail like coins, pocketing evidence. Dorian's face cleared when he saw me, as if recognition was a surprise he hadn't rehearsed. He stepped toward us, hands slightly raised, an apologetic posture that has the texture of regret without consequence. I didn't know you'd be here, he said, voice laced with the kind of confusion that asks for forgiveness. Celine turned, radiant, practiced. She smiled in a way that suggested she had always owned every room she entered. Oh, you two know each other? Funny, he's told me everything about your episodes, she said, light and poisonous. The word episodes hung there like accusation shaped as concern, and the room tilted just enough to unbalance me. Maris's hand tightened once around my arm, a small anchor against the swirl of old betrayals resurfacing. I steadied myself, counting steps in my head, measuring how far a friendship had been from us both. Soothing line, I breathed quietly, slowly, patient, deliberate, gathering strength for what had to come. Soft landing close, my smile did not feel like a surrender, it was the calm before a planned reckoning. Later that afternoon I went to leave court papers at Claudia's house, because procedure required the delivery. Imogen ran out clutching crayons and a piece of paper that smelled faintly of glue and gym class, bright and earnest. "Wanna see my school project?" she asked, eyes wide in that uncomplicated trust children give like gifts. She shoved the drawing into my hands. Grandma, mom, cat, house, garden, no space left for me on the page. "Where am I?" I asked softly, voice low so the question would not scare the child away. "Mom said you're not real family. Just legal family," Imogen announced, as if reading a factual label from an instruction manual. The words landed like a small stone thrown from a distance intended to be casual and therefore cruel. I folded the paper with careful hands, smoothing the crease as if that action could repair more than paper. Soothing line, I held the quiet slowly, letting tenderness and grief sit together without rushing either one away. Soft landing close, I left the drawing on the console, a small witness to what they insisted upon denying. At home that night, Maris played a message she had found tucked in a voicemail archive. Ben's voice broke through the speaker, short, mid-sentence, the audio frayed as if someone had clipped the end of his thought. He had been my godfather, the man who once brought me biscuits when school felt impossible, the one who called me by my name with warmth. The message cut off before his warning could finish. Maris's expression said the rest without words. "He was asked not to interfere," she said, voice low, like someone describing a quiet ritual of exclusion. Claudia had told him to step back, to let family matters be managed by those who spoke louder, who smiled easier. They removed advocates quietly, methodically, until I found myself alone in a room full of witnesses. Soothing line, I held that absence slowly, gently, making room for the sorrow without letting it consume my plan. Soft landing close, the missing endings of Ben's messages took on new weight as I filed them into the evidence binder. Confrontation with Claudia came the next morning, practical and horizontal in the kitchen where tea had once been an offering. I asked her plainly, using my courtroom voice softened for a private audience, "Why did you ask Ben not to come?" She poured tea as if grief and explanation were commodities to be rationed carefully across the household. "Because you were drifting," she said, tilting her head at a practiced angle designed to make compassion look like control. "I didn't drift," I said, choosing each word to echo like a gavel in an empty room. "You built the tide." Her face did not change much. She had a mask for every season of our lives, learned and flawless. "You always needed someone to blame," Claudia replied, the accusation a shield shaped into truth by repetition. "And you always needed someone to silence," I answered, the sentence landing between us with a clarity that felt almost surgical. Soothing line, I found my breath gently, slowly, and let the pain settle into a resolve that felt warm and ready. Soft landing close, our eyes held longer than any slap would have, and something small in me shifted at the sight. Celine did not wait long. Within hours she was live, camera steady, voice honeyed, smiling like charity wrapped in steel. She spoke of family history and fragility, of cycles and trauma, painting me as the fragile element in a narrative she had curated. Thousands watched the stream and typed in responses, condemnation wrapped as concern, solidarity disguised as gossip. The comments moved fast, opinions mushroomed louder than facts ever would. I stood at the bathroom mirror later, light, harsh and intimate, tracing the lines that worry had written across my face. I pressed record on my phone and began to speak, not for the audience that was already decided, but for the one I still owned. I told truth simply, dates, names, signatures, and the little betrayals that had accumulated into the theft of my life. My voice was steady, measured, a judge rendering a quiet verdict with the facts I finally had the courage to say aloud. Soothing line, I spoke slowly, softly, letting each truth land where it needed to, tender and exact. Soft landing close. When I stopped the recording, the room felt less like a cage and more like an archive of what I would not relinquish. If they wanted the story their way, I decided then, I would give them mine in full, unvarnished, and documented. I walked to the filing cabinet labeled contingency and opened the drawer where I kept copies of every slight they had hoped to bury. The recorder's light blinked red in the dim, a small, steady witness to the narrative I was assembling piece by hard piece. Outside, someone laughed on the street below, unaware that a quiet war had been declared inside my house. I pressed save, uploaded files to secure drives, and drew the first legal lines that would breathe life into every small, erased moment. They had rearranged people against me. They had taught others to doubt me on their behalf. But I had learned, finally, how to be audible in a room that had been taught to ignore. Cliffhanger line, if they wanted the story, they would get it, the whole sequence, the receipts, and the courtroom light to follow. There are truths you whisper to survive, and truths you shout when you're done surviving. I'd spent most of my life whispering, keeping the peace that no one had earned. But that Monday morning, I walked into the courthouse ready to be loud in the only language they respected, legal filing. The air was cool and still, the kind of quiet that feels heavy with waiting. I wore the same navy blazer Celine once called dreary. She'd laughed years ago and said, "No one remembers the woman who dresses like the background." I smiled at the thought as I buttoned it now. Let them forget. The background was about to swallow the stage. I reached the clerk's counter, the file thick in my hands. Fraud, identity theft, custodial negligence. Words that had lived only as pain now existed as statute numbers and typed pages. The embossed seal pressed beneath my palm felt solid, official, irreversible. I wasn't trying to tear them down. I was just done holding them up. The clerk took the documents, stamped them with a heavy thud that echoed down the marble hallway. It sounded like closure. By mid-morning, the courtroom was full. Reporters had caught wind of the emergency custody hearing. Celine sat at the table beside her attorney, her hair perfectly arranged, her smile brittle. Claudia sat behind her, wrapped in a pale scarf, feigning frailty. Across the aisle, Maris leaned close to me and whispered, "Breathe steady. We're not here to wound. We're here to win." The judge entered, calm and unreadable. "We are here to address allegations of property fraud and determine temporary custody arrangements for the minor, Imogen Vaughn." Claudia rose first. Her voice trembled with practiced sorrow. "Your Honor, my daughter is confused. She's attacking her own family out of resentment. She doesn't know what she's doing." The judge nodded, expression neutral. Maris stood, spine straight, voice even. "With the court's permission, I submit Exhibit 7, the original deed, notarized. You'll notice alterations on page 3. Dates adjusted, signature traced. Witness, Claudia Vaughn." Gasps whispered through the gallery. Celine reached for the file, fumbled. Her manicured nails scraped across the table as if she could claw the evidence back into the folder. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Custody is revoked pending investigation. Property transfers will be frozen until further review." Claudia's hand flew to her chest. "Please, Your Honor, she's our family." The judge looked directly at me. "That's exactly why this matters." Celine collapsed into her chair. Her eyes darted toward me, pleading, desperate, furious. I stayed still. I had spent too many years mistaking movement for mercy. When the session ended, I stepped into the hallway. The crowd thinned around us, leaving echoes of whispers that felt like wind. Celine followed, her heels uneven on the tile. Rowena, she said, breath quick, voice cracked. Please. I'll lose everything. Just write something for the record. Say this was a misunderstanding. I turned. Her face looked different without the confidence, younger somehow, like the girl who once borrowed my dresses before dances. You wrote me out first, I said quietly. She blinked, tears threatening but never falling. Now live with your version. The words left my mouth calm, even. They didn't sound like revenge, they sounded like oxygen. I walked away before she could answer. By Thursday, the story was everywhere. Judge exposes family fraud. The words looked strange on a screen. People who hadn't spoken to me in years sent messages full of surprise and admiration, but none of it mattered. What mattered was the sound of the fax machine in Maris's office, spitting out confirmation after confirmation. The case had been officially recorded under State v. Vaughn. That weekend, I stood at the county registrar's office. A volunteer from the nonprofit met me with paperwork. You're sure about this? She asked. It's a generous donation. I nodded. It's overdue. The land I signed over wasn't large, but it was the piece I had fought hardest for, the plot that had once been my father's garden. A part of Texas soil that had belonged to generations of silence. The ink on the deed bled slightly from the pressure of my pen. A portion of earth that once buried my voice would now fund scholarships for young women studying law. I could almost hear my father's voice through the rustle of papers. Make it count, Row. Later that day, Claudia received the letter. I knew because the nursing home called to confirm receipt. Her power of attorney had been revoked. She would no longer manage family finances. She called me 3 times. I didn't answer. In her new room at the Elder Care Center, she must have noticed the photo on the dresser, the one from 1989. 2 daughters smiling, frozen in time. When it slipped from her hand and hit the floor, the frame cracked down the middle. One half held Celine's face, the other fractured beyond recognition. The nurse told me later that she whispered my name that evening. The first time in years. And no one was there to hear it. I didn't take comfort in that. I didn't need to. Back in my office, I closed the last file of the case. The folder was thick, heavy with years of proof. I slid it into the drawer labeled closed. The metal clicked softly, the kind of sound that doesn't demand applause. For a long time, I sat there, breathing. The courthouse outside hummed with its usual rhythm, phones, footsteps, the faint shuffle of papers. Ordinary life. Silence doesn't always mean forgiveness. Sometimes, it means finality. I stood, stretched, and walked to the window. The sky was wide and clean. Somewhere beyond it, people were still talking, rewriting, guessing. It didn't matter. What mattered was the stillness in my chest, earned and unshaken. Softly, gently, I whispered to no one, it's over. The morning sun found its way across my kitchen floor before I did. It slipped between the blinds in thin, careful lines, settling over a cooling cup of tea that I had forgotten to drink. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustle of paper under my fingertips. A small envelope sat beside the cup, cream-colored, slightly smudged with fingerprints. The handwriting was uneven, uncertain, but familiar. The return address was a surprise, Imogen Vaughn. I opened it slowly, gently, the paper soft where her hand must have pressed too hard with a crayon. The letters danced across the page in shaky color. Dear Aunt Rowena. I miss you. You are real. I know you are. I told my teacher I want to be a judge like you. Love, Imogen. The words blurred slightly, but no tears fell. They didn't need to. My breath caught halfway, like the pause between sentences that matter. That was enough. I sat for a while, staring at the note. The house around me held the kind of silence that didn't ache anymore, it simply existed. I folded the letter once, neatly, and placed it on the counter beside my tea. It was the first time in months that I didn't feel like I had to defend my own existence. Later that afternoon, I drove to the river. The Colorado shimmered under the midday light, its surface rippling with small winds that carried the scent of rain and cedar. The bench was still there, the one where my father and I used to sit after church when the world still felt straightforward. The paint had faded, initials carved by strangers overlapped our old ones. I ran my fingers along the wood, tracing the faint groove of our shared memory. They had left the bench empty for years, yet I had always been here, waiting quietly, waiting for them to stop looking past me. The breeze lifted my hair across my cheek, cool and kind. I watched the river move, unbothered by anything that tried to stop it. Healing, I thought, looked a lot like this, movement without announcement. I stayed until the shadows lengthened and the sun began to slip behind the trees. My father used to say that time wasn't something you lost, it was something you carried differently when you grew older. I think I finally understood. Softly, quietly, I whispered into the air, "We made it, Dad." That evening, I sat at my desk and began to write. Not an affidavit, not a statement, just a letter. The words came easily, though my hands trembled slightly as they formed each sentence. Dear Imogen. You're not who they say you are. Neither am I. Sometimes love hides under too much noise. Don't let it confuse you. You have your own name, your own story. Protect it. I signed it but didn't seal the envelope. Instead, I placed it in the drawer with my childhood photographs, the few that survived the fires of revision, and left it there. Safe, not secret. The next morning, I walked through the courthouse for what would be my final day before taking sabbatical. The corridors smelled faintly of coffee and paper, the way they always did. Familiar faces nodded, bailiff, clerks, security officers. They didn't offer congratulations or pity. They offered recognition, which felt better than either. I paused before entering the courtroom one last time. The bench gleamed under the fluorescent light, every line of its oak frame as solid as the day I'd first stood behind it. I rested my hand along the armrest, fingers brushing the grain. It wasn't the seat that gave me power. It was the silence I survived to sit here. Maris met me later that day at a small cafe across from the courthouse. The place was almost empty, quiet except for the sound of spoons against porcelain. She set down her cup and smiled, a soft, tired smile. You didn't burn the house down, she said. I stirred my coffee, watching the swirl of cream dissolve into brown. No, I said. But I stopped watering what was already ash. We didn't toast. We didn't need to. The kind of understanding between us didn't require ceremony. It was built on long days, heavier truths, and the mutual relief of survival. After she left, I stayed a while longer, listening to the murmur of strangers around me. Ordinary life had a rhythm again. At sunset, Claudia sat in her assisted living room, the television casting pale light over the stillness. On the screen, a news anchor announced my name, her voice bright with cheer. Judge Rowena Greer awarded the State Bar's Medal of Integrity for outstanding public service. The nurse passing by stopped and smiled. That your daughter? She asked. Claudia hesitated. Her reflection in the screen looked older than she remembered, smaller somehow. After a long pause, she said, I had two. One taught me how to control. The other taught me how to stop. When the segment ended, she reached for the remote and turned off the television. The room went quiet, filled only with the hum of an old air conditioner. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. In another part of the city, I was locking up my office. The last case file slid into a drawer labeled closed. The metal latch clicked once, sure and calm. I picked up the envelope from Imogen and tucked it inside a book on the shelf. Some stories don't end with forgiveness. Some end with understanding, and enough space to breathe again. Outside, the evening light stretched long over the courthouse steps. The flag stirred softly above, and I walked toward the parking lot, the echo of my steps fading into the gentle hum of night. For the first time, the chair behind me didn't feel like a loss. It felt like freedom. Some stories don't end with forgiveness. Some end with clarity. And the courage to walk away from what no longer deserves your silence. If you've ever been written out of your own family story, maybe this one made you feel seen. Tell me, what would you say if you were finally given the microphone? If this story moved you, subscribe for more quiet power. Truth told gently. And justice served without raising your voice.